Yeah, as Ellie said, I'm a librarian and archivist in Western Mass. I've been doing this work for a few years with the Library Freedom Project, which is an anti-surveillance organization. And the way this presentation is going to work, I'm going to start with kind of some of the scarier Orwellian examples of how different types of corporate and government surveillance can compromise information about your reproductive choices. And then at the end, or well, in the second half, I'm going to go into how you can protect yourself from that surveillance. And I know that the first part can feel really scary and disempowering, but I really hope that I don't leave you in that scared, disempowered sort of place. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and hopefully everyone can see this. So let's see. The first point that I'd like to make is that individual safety, so safety for individuals, requires collective work. It requires all of us to really think about the information we share, how we share it. And I hope I can make that point pretty clearly throughout the organization or throughout the presentation. Also, you know, so I think one of the big differences between now, you know, 2022 in the wake of the Dobbs decision versus, you know, back in the pre-1973 pre-Roe world is that the surveillance capabilities of private entities and the government have increased dramatically since then in all sorts of different ways. And they're in ways that are, you know, just ubiquitous to our daily life. So this is a map from the Guttmacher Institute, which tracks all sorts of reproductive rights issues. This map, it's updated as of December 4th, so just a few days ago, and color codes the US based on, you know, the laws in each state from most protective to most restrictive. I would recommend checking this out. You can click on a state and see what the, you know, what the current laws are in place. And in fact, some of these, you know, changed after the midterm election. But it gives you a sense of, you know, where there is and is not abortion access currently. And even, you know, within these states, there's quite a bit of difference. There are even two states, I want to say it's Idaho, and I can't remember what the other one is, where there's actually no affirmative right currently for doctors to perform an abortion in any circumstance. So like even for the life of the pregnant person. A doctor can use that as a defense if they are, you know, arrested and put on trial, but there's actually no like affirmative right to perform an abortion under the law in those two states. And really, while the people, it's always going to be the people who are seeking abortions who are most put at risk by these laws, but they also endanger really anyone who moves through the country in possession of a uterus. You know, we've already seen cases where people who were miscarrying or, you know, had wanted non-viable pregnancies really were taken to the point of, you know, grievous bodily harm before they were able to obtain the services, the medical services they need. There was just a story, I think last week on NPR, where a woman who lived in DC went to Ohio for her brother's wedding, and she miscarried, you know, learned while she was back home that she was miscarrying, but went to the wedding in Ohio, started bleeding profusely, went to the hospital. They were like, well, this was when Ohio's 6-week ban was in effect. You know, we can't be certain that this pregnancy is non-viable. So they send her home from the hospital. And it wasn't until she like passed out from blood loss in a bathtub and had to be like revived by paramedics that they would actually perform a DNC. And actually saved this woman's life. This is a map from about a year ago, and it was where abortion access was predicted to decline. So all the little dots were the locations of abortion clinics as of a year ago. The red ones were the ones in states where, at that time, it was predicted that if Roe fell, those states would make it illegal. And so you can see just from the location of those dots how far it is that people in those places would have to travel to get safe and legal abortion care. So now I'm going to go into some of those ways that our actions can be tracked online or are being compromised, our safeties are being compromised online. So there was a bill that was proposed this summer in South Carolina that would outlaw websites that tell how to get an abortion. So, the people that make those websites, the internet service providers, could be prosecuted for even having those websites online and accessible to people in South Carolina. And this legislation was based on a template from, I think it's like the National Right to Life organization, something like that. So while that bill hasn't passed yet, it's legislation that we could see come up in other states as well. It's very important to note that it's quite difficult for doctors and other medical professionals to distinguish between abortions, so especially medication abortions and miscarriages. And people here, as well as elsewhere in the world, have been prosecuted for what is almost certainly a miscarriage. And as with so many things in the US, the people who are most likely to be prosecuted for this sort of thing are people whose lives are already subject to disproportionate scrutiny by the legal system. So folks who are poor, minoritized, gender minorities, racial and ethnic minorities, sex workers. The woman on the right in this news story was a Native American woman who, this was several years ago, actually. So before the Dobbs decision came down, was arrested and sent to jail for what was like clearly a miscarriage. But she was charged with manslaughter for that because of like her actions during pregnancy. So the things that we purchase, the apps that we use on our phones, the places we go that are stored in our location data, all these things leave digital traces that data brokers and advertisers compile into detailed profiles about who we are. So data brokers are really any company that sort of aggregates information about us. Some really common examples are those websites that you see if you ever Google your name. They'll be things like Intellis or My Life, or there's lots of different companies that do that. Some of which have like web presences, some of which don't, or don't have web presences that you would ever see as a consumer. The places that we leave information about our choices and actions that are most likely to disclose what reproductive choices we're making are those things that we interact with most often. So, you're most likely to leave information about your choices in your texts, in your email, Facebook Messenger, your browser history. And those are things that law enforcement has already used to prosecute folks. So again, even before Dobbs came down, there was a case where a 17-year-old girl and her mother were prosecuted for the teenager's self-managed abortion. And in fact, the police got a warrant or subpoenaed the information from Facebook, and Facebook gave them the Facebook Messenger records from between this teenager and her mother that was then used to prosecute both of them. Again, this, texts, web searches about abortion have been used to prosecute women still before Dobbs. This has happened in several different states. So the apps that we use, they also reveal private information, oftentimes not just to that app, but then to other services as well. So a lot of the apps that we use on our phones are they're built using bits of software from other companies. So those are called app developer kits, and a lot of times, Facebook offers these app developer kits to programmers, so does Google. And the thing that the developers get out of that is it's like this free software that you can use as a starting place. And the thing that Facebook and Google and some of these others get out of it is that the information that a person shares on that app is then shared with Facebook. And so there was some investigative reporting a few years ago about different period tracking apps that showed that several of these were built on this Facebook developer app framework. And the information that people put into those was then being shared to Facebook. And in one case, in the case of one app, that information was being shared in plain text to Facebook. So not encrypted, not scrambled up as it went through the internet, but in plain text. And the sorts of things that people put in period tracking apps are not just when they're menstruating, but can be like when they've had sex, very intimate details of their life, never thinking, in their wildest dreams that Facebook then has access to the information about, when they have sex, when they're ovulating, all these very, intimate and private things that they're putting into this app that, they were thinking was essentially a calendar. Just to stay on that Facebook bit. So Facebook collects a huge amount of data about us and licenses it to advertisers. And this, again, is not just the information that we share when you're using Facebook, but also from every other thing that Facebook collects information from. This is tangential and has nothing to do with reproductive rights, but there was just investigative reporting that came out, I think like a week or two ago, that a bunch of different tax preparation software, in fact, share information with Facebook. So this was H&R Block was the one that I was most familiar with, but then there were two others as well that had Facebook Pixel embedded in the software. So Facebook Pixel is like, if you're using a website that has it, it then links that whatever you do on that website back to Facebook itself, whether or not you actually have a personal profile on Facebook. But some of this information that was being shared from the tax preparation software was like your income, information about your dependents, like the, what was it? Something about like the deductions people got for paying for like college tuition, all sorts of wild stuff. Anyways, so Facebook collects this huge amount of data about us and licenses it to advertisers. This is a screenshot of an ad campaign that the encrypted messenger Signal tried to run on Facebook. And so you would see, if you logged onto Facebook and you saw this ad, what you would see is something very targeted to you. And so what Signal did was use the information that Facebook was sharing with them to create these really targeted ads to kind of scare people a little bit and show them what sort of thing was available. So the stuff in dark blue were things that they were really highlighting. So like, you got this ad because you're a K-pop loving chemical engineer. This ad used your location to see you're in Berlin and you have a new baby and just moved and you're really feeling those pregnancy exercises lately. Facebook claims that this was just a stunt, that, Signal didn't actually get this information. Signal claims like, yeah, no, this really, you really shared this with us, and we just, you took it down before they actually ran. So you can decide who to believe there. Also, our credit card data really is used by a lot of different stores and data brokers to for all different reasons, but this is from an article from 2012, so a decade ago, about how Target was using customers' credit card data, credit card history to predict who might be pregnant. And this is a pretty long quote, but I just want to read it because I think it's really helpful in illustrating how companies use our data really granularly. So it says, Target assigns each shopper a unique code known internally as the guest ID that keeps tabs on everything we buy. If you use a credit card or a coupon, or fill out a survey, or mail in a refund, or call the customer helpline, or open an email we've sent you, or visit our website, we'll record it and link it to your guest ID, Powell said. Powell was the person who developed this system. We want to know everything we can. Also linked to your guest ID is demographic information like your age, whether you are married and have kids, which part of town you live in, how long it takes you to drive to the store, your estimated salary, whether you've moved recently, what credit cards you carry in your wallet, and what websites you visit. As Powell's computers crawled through the data, he was able to identify about 25 products that, when analyzed together, allowed him to assign each shopper a pregnancy prediction score. More important, he could also estimate her due date to within a small window, so Target could send coupons timed to very specific stages of her pregnancy. So again, this was a decade ago. Like, if this technology was that advanced a decade ago, I think, that it's probably, increased exponentially since then. And one of the things that really surprised me about this is, in those, among those 25 products that they were using to create their pregnancy prediction score were things that you would think had really nothing to do with pregnancy. Like, one of them was unscented lotion, because they thought okay, well, people who are in the early stages of pregnancy might be feeling nauseous if they smell a scented lotion. And so, it turned out that unscented lotion was one of these things that in combination with other products predicted that someone was pregnant. And the reason that they were trying to figure out who was pregnant is because, Target offers baby registries, which are really lucrative for the store. And so, if you're a person who creates a baby registry, baby shower registry with Target, you're likely to stay a loyal customer. Plus, you're going to make all these huge purchases, and the people that you, your family members and friends are going to make all these large purchases. Purchase data from customer loyalty cards, things like your CVS card or Walgreens card, are also shared with outside companies. And in fact, a lot of times those customer loyalty programs are actually, it'll say your CVS card, but it's actually run by a third-party data broker. So on the right, there's a screenshot of, this was a tweet that it's from a few months ago. So it says, "Dear Walgreens, I received this package today, a week after purchasing a pregnancy test at your store. I was asked to take the test by my doctor despite having no fallopian tubes." In the thread, this person went on to explain that, they used their Walgreens card when they made this purchase. There's nothing else about them that they could think of that would lead, Enfamil to send them a sort of welcome to motherhood package, other than having had to take this pregnancy test for some procedure they needed to have, despite being, having no fallopian tubes. And so they were quite certain that this, was because of the use of that customer loyalty card. There's another technique called geofencing, which can be used to find and target people in all sorts of different locations, but including in abortion clinics. And in fact, advertisers working with anti-choice groups have already done it. So this was an article from several years ago, 2016, about an advertising company or an advertiser who figured out that they could use geofencing, which it's basically like triangulating using cell towers to figure out to target things to people within a particular area. He used it to send advertisements to the cell phones of people who were in clinic waiting rooms for things like evangelical adoption agencies and crisis pregnancy centers. And so, if an advertiser has done that, if law enforcement could do that as well, could not send advertisements, but can use and often does use geofencing to target people in a small area. Another thing, so, many places that we go into, whether it's your own house or someone else's, have smart speakers. Those, they're not your Alexa, it's not just keeping locally the things that you tell it to, but your voice is stored in the cloud. The things that you do are stored. A few years ago, there was some investigative reporting by Bloomberg News that found that, in fact, Amazon workers, were reviewing audio clips of what people were saying to Alexa. And in fact, they weren't just listening to it, they could actually determine, in their system, they could see the addresses of where people who they were listening to lived. And in fact, smart speaker records are increasingly being used in, by law enforcement to, prove crimes have happened. Another thing to be aware of are DNA databases, both law enforcement and consumer databases that often work with law enforcement. Those DNA databases can identify you through your relatives. I think this idea, especially of the genealogical DNA or forensic DNA, that where someone was identified through the ancestry test that their family member did, that really came to public attention. I think it was the Golden State Killer, something like that. A few years ago, this serial killer was identified by people working through a consumer database where people who had taken these, 23andMe or Ancestry type tests uploaded their DNA to try to connect with relatives, and then it was used by law enforcement. And I think that's something that it's hard to it's hard to fault that, right? No one really wants serial killers out there, but that same technology can be used for things that are much much less egregious. So this article from 2018, at that time, they found that most white Americans' DNA could be identified through genealogy databases, and they were predicting that within 2 years, it would be 90% of white Americans' DNA could be identified through genealogy databases. And for Black Americans and other ethnic groups, that percentage was rising as well. So basically, that's where we are now. Enough of our relatives, enough of our close and distant relatives have done these DNA databases or DNA tests that it's almost certain that we could, basically all of us could be identified, whether or not we've taken one of those tests ourselves. So there's at least one instance in which law enforcement have already tried to identify the parents of fetal remains through DNA. So back in 2018, Georgia law enforcement used DNA testing to try to find the parents of fetal remains that were found in wastewater. There was no evidence that this fetus had ever breathed air, which means that there was no evidence that it was born alive, it was miscarried or aborted. And I think one of the most telling things, the caption under the picture, I think really encapsulates the issue, which was neither the fetus nor the two people with whom its DNA might match have committed a crime. All right. So also, I just wanted to say something about schools and school-owned devices. So pre-pandemic and then, increasing hugely through the pandemic, many school districts give out laptops or Chromebooks to their students. I think almost every district, especially in Massachusetts, once school went remote, gave their kids Chromebooks so that, kids could connect during remote school. Most of these, or at least a lot of these school districts, use software that keeps some sort of track of what students are doing on those devices. I know my kids' school district was using a software called GoGuardian, which did a bunch of different things, but one of the things that it did is the district could set a list of like trigger words that if a student used it in an email or, searched for it or used anything on this list in a paper, the administration would be notified. And this is advertised by these companies as a way to prevent suicide and prevent school violence. But I know with GoGuardian and with several of these other companies that have similar software, the district can set that word list themselves. And so I think it's easy to imagine that there are probably school districts out there where, whether they're in a state with where abortion access has been strictly limited, or whether it's just a administrator with, who is anti-abortion, where they, add things like abortion or misoprostol or, abortion pills to that list and then get notifications about, anyone who might be searching for that on their school-owned device. In addition to that, also, in my kids' school district, so they have this one-to-one Chromebook program where every child in the district has a Google account, and every kid has a Chromebook. The kids are assigned a Google ID, when they're in kindergarten, and if they stay in the same school district, that's their same Google ID throughout, until they graduate high school. And also they have it configured so that every single thing, my school district at least has it configured so that every single thing a student does is saved. So there's no private browsing. You can't really delete anything. So their entire history from kindergarten to 12th grade is saved and easily accessible by administrators. Also, I know from the community college where I work, while almost every school district that has this sort of program says, these are just for the student who is using the device, or the student who the device is assigned to, many other folks tend to use these. So, I have talked to students at the college where I work who say, yeah, I've been using my, my kid's school laptop to try to write my papers. So it's not only the activities of the student to whom the device is assigned that could potentially be compromised by the device, but also anyone else in the household who uses that same device. So now we're going to go into figuring out our own risk profiles. And, I should say we're here in Massachusetts. Massachusetts legislators passed the Roe Act I think last year or the year before, which enshrines the right to abortion in state law. But still, we have loved ones in other states. We travel to other states for all different reasons. We, our kids might go to other states for school, and we should be able to freely move around, and our loved ones, wherever they are in the country, should be able to freely move around without fearing for their ability to make their own medical decisions. So I'm going to go into how to figure out your own risk profile. So there's this series of 5 questions that it's called threat modeling or risk assessment. It comes from the information security field. And the first question is, what do I have that I want to protect? So what are my assets? Then who do I want to protect it from? Who are my adversaries? How likely is it that I will need to protect this thing? How bad are the consequences if I fail? And how much trouble am I willing to go through to try to prevent those consequences? So I'm going to go into some examples of what that could mean. So what are your assets? These could be things like communications. Your assets are, your emails, your texts. They could be your contacts, people who could be helping you. This could be information about your location, your social media accounts, but then assets are also things like your physical safety and the freedom to make your own medical decisions. Your adversaries, depending on who you are and where you live, could be law enforcement. It could be data brokers or any company that tracks and stores information about you. It could be family members or intimate partners. And this risk profile or threat model is very specific to individuals, to their life circumstances, again, to where they live, who they live with. How likely is it that you will need to protect these things? This is going to depend on the laws in your local area. So again, you could refer back to that map from the Guttmacher Institute. Also, whether you can trust the people around you, the people you live with, and also likely how wealthy you are. Do you have the funds and the ability to take time off work or to get childcare to travel somewhere that you could get safe access to abortion care? How bad are the consequences if you fail? These could be things like being trapped in an abusive relationship, risking your physical health, arrest and incarceration for you and those that help you, potentially losing custody of your children. We know that the majority of people who seek abortions are folks who are already parents. So now we're going to get into some answers to that last question. What am I willing to do to prevent consequences? And I'm going to go through a series of low-tech steps and then a series of higher-tech steps. So for the low-tech steps, the first one is to keep a narrow circle of trust. Who do you absolutely know that you can trust beyond a shadow of a doubt? Those would be the people to communicate with. Another thing is to pay cash for anything pregnancy related and not use a customer loyalty card. So this gets back to, the example of how, say, Target uses your credit card data, or how, using a Walgreens card can share information with advertisers and other companies about, your purchases. turn off location tracking on your phone and don't bring a phone to a clinic. So, you know, we all walk around with these tracking devices on us all the time. You can go into your settings and turn off the location tracking either completely or, you know, just for apps that don't absolutely need it. But yeah, not bringing a phone to a clinic, you know, I mentioned that example of the geofencing. So that, you know, that would be, especially if you live in a place where abortion is fully illegal, you know, don't bring the phone to the clinic. Park away from clinics or meetings and walk to them. It's not just phones that have location tracking. Many newer cars have, you know, built-in GPS systems that, as well as just, you know, more less high-tech ways of telling, you know, which car belongs to which person. You know, we all have license plates on our cars, and you know, if there is a car parked near a particular location that someone suspects is an abortion clinic, you know, it's easy to tell who that car belongs to. And then finally, don't talk about anything sensitive in a room with a smart speaker. This gets back to the example of, you know, smart speaker records being subpoenaed by law enforcement. All right, we're going to get into the higher tech steps, and then I'm going to explain a little more what some of these mean. So the first is, and again, this is going to be not for everyone's risk model, but for people who either, you know, are not safe with the people they live in, or, for example, live in a state like South Carolina, if South Carolina passes that law that bans certain websites in the state. So this would be using the Tor browser or a high quality VPN when searching for abortion information. And I'll explain a little more what that means in one of the following slides. Don't reuse passwords or link accounts, and enable two-factor authentication on any site that allows it. So reusing passwords just means, you know, using the same password for multiple different sites. Linking accounts is, you know, on many different places, you'll see like sign into this with your Facebook account or sign into it with your Amazon or your Google account. You know, that's really convenient, but it means that if, for one thing, if your password and your email and password combo for one of those accounts is compromised, it's, you know, then that person has access to all your accounts. And it also means that those accounts can easily share information. And two-factor authentication, there's a lot of different types of two-factor authentication, but two-factor authentication is that sort of thing where you try to log into something and then you have to, say, put in a 6-digit code that's texted to you. One of these other high-tech steps is to use something, an encrypted texting service like Signal with expiring messages to discuss anything sensitive. And again, I'll show what that looks like. And then a final one is turning off biometric authentication on your phone. So this is something like using face print or fingerprint to unlock your phone. Again, this would be for people with really specifically high risk assessments, but a lot of times, especially folks living in who are at high risk of domestic violence or living with unsafe partners, you know, oftentimes the partner will say, like, pick up their hand in the night and use their finger to unlock their phone, or, you know, it's easy to hold up someone's phone in front of their face and unlock it. So if you can turn that off and just use the password instead, that's a little more secure. So I mentioned the Tor browser. You know, it's best known as the way to get to the dark web, but what Tor does is it makes it so if you're using it, your computer cannot store any information about the website that you end up at, and that website that you end up at can't save, it doesn't know where you started from. And the way that it does that is that like your search gets bounced around to these different computers around the world. And there are a number of like fake Tors out there. So if you actually want to get the Tor browser, download it from torproject.org. The torproject.org, that's where you can get it for desktops and also Android. For Apple, the one that's like actually legit is called Onion Browser. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. It's similar, though not quite as secure as Tor. Basically, people describe it as like a tunnel through the internet. So similarly, if you're using a VPN, it hides where you're going from like your internet service provider, and to some extent from the final place where you end up on the internet. It's good to figure out if you're using an actually like good VPN. I would recommend checking out this VPN guide on the Digital Defense Fund, because a lot of the free VPNs out there are actually harvesting information about you. I mentioned not reusing passwords on multiple websites. I would also recommend going to this website, Pwned.com, Pwned, and checking out put your password in and click to see Pwned. Basically, if your credentials, if your email and password combination have been compromised in any data breaches, it will show you here. So, you know, data breaches are like when you get a notification, say from your some shopping site that you've used that says, you know, like 300,000 of our customers' accounts have been hacked. If when you put your email address in and click it and see that your credentials have been compromised on a site, for one thing, you need to go in and change your password on that site, but then you also need to change your password on any other site where you have used that same password. So what makes for a strong password is that it's long, random, and unique. But human brains are not really like, we're not great at remembering long strings of random, unique characters. And so a way that you can actually create long random passwords that you can actually remember is there's a technique called Diceware. You can look up on the Electronic Frontier Foundation, but basically this is if you want to go really intense, you can roll a dice. I think it's like 6 dice, and whatever combination of numbers you have that corresponds to like a word on this really long list of words. And then you use those like words together to make a really strong password. And it's, you can remember it because they're words, but it's still random because there's no, other than your roll of dice, there's nothing that associates those words together. It's not like they're song lyrics or, words from a poem. The way that I use this is that I use a password manager, and I use that really long passcode with the different words as my like master password to get into the password manager. And then I use the password manager to generate and save long, random, unique passwords for every other site that I use. I mentioned Signal encrypted messenger. This works pretty much like other texting software. So encryption means that stuff is like scrambled up as it's traveling through the ether. But with Signal, you can set up disappearing messages. So you can set the amount of time you want that message to be visible on the phone of whoever you're sending it to. And, there's a bunch of different options. It could disappear as soon as it's read, after 5 minutes or something. So for people who live in an unsafe location or unsafe state, having a short window of saving it would be a good idea. So there are organizations and folks that are committed to helping people obtain safe abortion access. There's abortion travel funds, Plan C pills, Digital Defense Fund, which I mentioned has that VPN guide, aid access, which is helping folks get medication abortions over the internet. These are some of the people that I wanted to thank: Watertown Public Library, Kate Ewell, Allison Macrina, Emmy Paris, the Library Freedom Project, and the National Forum on the Prevention of Cybersexual Abuse. And because I'm a librarian, I've got all my references for everything that I talked about. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I think we're going to go into the question and answer portion.
Thank you so much, Claire. We do have a couple of questions here. The first question is from early in the presentation, asking about a situation that you were describing in South Carolina, and what if the site and the webmaster are outside of that state? Is that still trackable?
I think it would depend on, well, there's a lot of factors, right? Like there are ways to hide who a webmaster is. It would depend on whether there are protections in the state where the person lives, or say if it's hosted overseas, if there are protections there. Like I know, you know, Massachusetts and Connecticut, for example, have done something where they, like we've passed legislation here that protects, say, medical providers who provide abortion services to people that may come from states where it's illegal. There could be something similar to that, where people who have websites in a particular place outside of, say, a state where that information is banned are protected. But again, that's only proposed legislation. It's not something that's passed already. And I would bet that if something like that is passed, it's going to make its way to the Supreme Court.
Thank you. The next question is, do physical devices like certain quote unquote security bags, I don't know the right term, block your signal from being tracked while a device is inside them? I've seen these sold for people who carry sensitive data on devices.
Yeah. Oh, what's it? It's, I know what you mean. Why am I forget? Like it was not Tesla. Wait, there's like, it's like a mesh thing that's supposed to block the signals. I would guess that it does block the signal. I mean, so if you're texting with someone or, you know, sending information over a device, you want it to be encrypted as it's moving over the internet. The information that you have on a device, you know, that's as secure as like the passwords that you have protecting it and protecting the apps on that device.
Some folks in the chat and the Q&A here have shared that it's maybe called a Faraday cage.
Faraday, yeah, yes, that's yeah. I was like, it's one of those like old people. Sorry, yeah, not Tesla. Yeah.
And a clarification: should we or should we not use two-factor authentication? Oh
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm sorry if I made that unclear. Yeah, absolutely. Enable two-factor authentication anytime that it's available. Yeah, you know, I know it sometimes can seem annoying, you know, especially if you like don't have your cell phone right there and you're trying to log into something, but that extra layer of security is really worth it.
Thank you. We have a few questions. I just put in the chat, but want to remind people we will have a recording made available of this talk. And there is a request for some of the references to be sent out. So I can certainly send those out to attendees for people to refer to later. And someone in the Q&A mentions, don't forget to add wearables and smartwatches. in parentheses location to your list that can't be tracked. Is there anything, or that can be tracked, apologies. Anything else you would add to that sort of list?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely wearables. You know, I know another time I gave this talk, someone asked about like, you know, how to protect, how to make it harder to identify yourself with like facial recognition technology. And I'm not at all an expert in that, but there are folks out there who are. There are folks in Boston who actually, it was like a people at the BPL, and then Joy Buolamwini at MIT, which I forget the name of her organization, but they ran this program called like Drag versus AI, where they were like trying to like disrupt a facial recognition software with like drag makeup and stuff like that. That would be another thing to, I guess, keep in mind if you're like, especially like moving through the physical world and trying to mask where you're going. But I am not an expert on how to do that.
Another question, well, so some,
yeah, sorry, that's.
yes, and someone in the chat here, I put a link for the drag versus AI, thanks for bringing that up. Someone in the Q&A also mentioned in terms of things that could track you that you might wear, Apple AirTag as another something to be aware of. Another question for you is, are smart devices listening or recording when not activated?
So like, for example, I know there's like the Hey Siri thing on your, you know, if you have that enabled on a Apple device, it's listening. It depends on the device, whether you have, whether it's recording, which I realize like is sometimes it's a like soft distinction. Yeah, that would be another thing I would say is like turn off Hey Siri or whatever the equivalent is on an Android device. I think it, you know, you'd have to check pretty carefully into the like settings and terms of use in that smart device. You know, and to be honest, I don't have a smart speaker, so I don't know whether you can set it to just listen but not save, right? One thing that I would recommend for anyone that has any sort of Google account is go to myactivity.google.com. It's where you can see what information Google is saving about you, and you can you know, adjust your privacy settings there. I believe there's a place in there to like, well, you can delete, you know, your search history and like say change what the settings it has for like YouTube and your location history if you use Google Maps on a phone or other device. But yeah, I would recommend checking that out.
Another question for you is, I struggle with passwords. What manager do you recommend?
There are a bunch of good ones out there. The one that we use at my work is, oh shit, sorry. Bitwarden is pretty good. That's the one we use at work. I would have recommended the one that I have used, except they did have a partial hack, LastPass. They say that it's just that no one's passwords actually got compromised, but yeah, I would use a paid one, or, you know, if you can't afford a paid one, a lot of devices have at least something built in. Like I know there's Keychain in Apple devices, which at least you can use as a password manager, like between, say, if you have multiple Apple devices, you could use Keychain as a password manager, but there are other ones that, you know, you can have it as an app and then a browser plugin. Yeah, there are a number of good ones out there. There are a bunch of different places that like review them, and I don't want to say like necessarily one is better than the other.
This question says, I don't know if you can answer this, but how far is the recording range of different types of smart devices? I have listed no Alexa or other smart devices as a priority in housemate searches. Thinking also about cafes, what if the device of the person at a table next to you, like what might they be able to pick up? That is the question.
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that. That's a really good one. Yeah, I feel like I read a story, like a news story about something where like the smart device records of someone who lived in one apartment were they were subpoenaed for a crime that happened in like an adjacent apartment. But you know, I would think that those devices would be it's going to be specific to the device, and I really don't know. And I would also think like if the example of a cafe, probably a louder cafe you're safer in, right? Yeah, I'm sure there are other people out there who could answer that better than I can, but that's a really interesting question.
And I've shared this in the chat, but someone recommended privacytools.io as another resource to potentially look at different alternatives and privacy protecting software.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And we have a nice comment that someone says, thank you for the information.